This is Talkaoke. This is actually an historic moment. It's the first time we've done Talkaoke live at a digital festival. So this is a very exciting breakthrough moment here. We've got a few people in the room. If you don't know what Talkaoke is, it's a kind of, it's a kind of free-form conversation. Today's opening conversation is all about patient participation. In the case, we've got another guest coming in. In the case of, we've lost Eden. Too scary. Maybe the bench, the bar of participation has been set too high. I don't know, but this is the question. That's the theme for today's session. Welcome, Evie. I'm good. I just want to say to those people watching on the Vimeo stream, please do jump on the Zoom, because this is a conversation about participation, but we also want you to participate in this discussion. So do come and join in. Hopefully the Zoom link will be, I haven't got my festival page open, but hopefully the Zoom link will be there on the Talkaoke page. So if you're watching on Vimeo, please do come and get involved in this. So where are we going to go from here? Does anyone want to kick us off? Has anyone here participated as a patient?
I haven't, but I once really wanted to.
Okay. Yeah.
No, but I mean, it wasn't for anything, the only participation was some kind of research to do with brain scanning. And I was really interested because I really wanted to see if I've got anything going on in my brain. I don't mean like anything.
Yeah.
I wanted to see if I've got any tumors or anything like that. And then they said, oh, actually, thanks for volunteering, but the scans we're going to be doing on you, they won't actually tell you about tumors. So are you all good to go? And I said, I'm busy, so I didn't do it. I just wanted to kind of use it.
Too busy to participate.
So that was like, it wasn't a participation really.
Yeah. I'm not sure if we are live on the Zoom, because when I've gone on to the Talkaoke page, all I can see is a cat video.
Video of a cat being born.
Yeah, but now I can't see anything at all. So we might have to wait for a little while. We did have one punter in the room, but I might have scared them off with by building it up, by overhyping it. And this, maybe we could learn a little bit here about what the best way to get people to participate is. Is how much hype is really? Oh, we've got another person coming in. Hello.
Hi. Hey.
So at the moment, this is Talkaoke. This is the first time ever. I don't want to make it too big a deal. It's the first time ever we've done Talkaoke live at a digital festival. At the moment, we're talking about patient participation and what is the what are the obstacles to participation. It turns out not so many people have actually participated as a patient. Welcome, Sue. Have you participated as a patient?
Sorry, in what way?
In any way. Well, I suppose apart from, in any way, really. Let's keep it open to begin with.
Well, I have a son with Pitt-Hopkins syndrome, so I've filled in many questionnaires.
Yeah.
In that respect, and also helped with the write-up of those of the results for kind of management guidelines.
Yeah. Would you like to participate more?
Well, I am always really with Pitt-Hopkins syndrome.
And in what way? What way do you think you could participate more? Or do you think you're doing it to the max already?
Well, at the moment we're trying to do kind of survey for the parents in the UK for their children to get more. With Pitt-Hopkins syndrome, we have only had a blood test to diagnose people since 2007. So, as you know, building up a natural history long term, so it needs constant involvement and trying to get parents to get involved when they're very busy and, you know, have a severely disabled child at home, or in our case.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the syndrome for those that may not know about it?
It's a neurodevelopmental syndrome. Most of our children have moderate to severe learning difficulties. I would say more severe at the moment, though of course as more get diagnosed, it's more severe that at first are more obvious to be diagnosed. The children are very slow in motor development, mainly non-verbal, but you know, there are a few that can speak in simple sentences. They tend to have severe constipation. Fortunately, my son doesn't have that, but the main kind of thing is that many of the children have, besides seizures, have hyperventilation, or what we call hyperbreathing, and apnea. And that's what often, if they have that will make, even though it's ultra rare, with sort of maybe 4 in a million being diagnosed, well, not being diagnosed, but the prevalence of being about that. That's the thing that often someone will look up a doctor if they haven't heard of a child or met a child with Pitt-Hopkins before. That will make them think Pitt-Hopkins, hopefully.
Okay. And so this is a relatively recent kind of understanding in terms of what to do, or how. I mean, what is the kind of level of treatment or understanding of this syndrome at the moment?
Breathing wise, we're trying to get funding for research. I've been though I'm from the UK and I'm the chair of the UK charity, I actually live in the Netherlands, which means I'm also in the Dutch group. So I'm very much in touch, therefore, with the doctors and researchers here as well. And you know, they're hoping very much that we can have more research into the breathing anomalies and the autonomic nervous system, which is all kind of very connected. And a lot of other issues the children have and the adults have are to do with the dysfunctional autonomic nervous system, which again, there's very little research. I mean, there's research for genuinely about it, but not when it comes down to something like Pitt-Hopkins syndrome or Rett syndrome, another syndrome that has problems with that.
And before, can I just ask, I know we're kind of, I mean, the whole point of this is I know if there are people watching online, do get involved in the chat. We're watching the chat. We're watching the Twitter feed as well. But I think this is a really interesting case. I mean, what I want to ask you, Sue, is how much did you know about genetic disorders before you had your son? I mean, was it like a really steep learning curve? And what was that like to find out about that?
Definitely a steep learning curve. I'm fortunate my husband's a biochemist, and my youngest son has a microbiology degree, and not microbiology, sorry, biomedical science degree, and is doing a forensic science MSc at the moment. So they explain a lot of things to me, time and time again. With the genetics with Pitt-Hopkins, it can be a pathogenic variant of the TCF4 gene, but it also can be a deletion or microdeletion, I think, as well. And so that's got quite confusing over the years, because people will see in their results DEL and think it's deletion, therefore they think that's a whole deletion, whereas it often, you know, I'm not a geneticist or a scientist. I only did biology, physics, chemistry, and that stuff up till O-level stage. But I wish I'd done it at A-level. But it does cause a lot of confusion because people use different words. I mean, even like now they tend to say pathogenic variant, but they used to say mutation. But sometimes when they say mutation, they actually just mean a change. And sometimes when they say change, they mean a mutation or deletion. And when you're parents, and I'm a parent, it's so confusing.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been trying to, for the website and things like that, trying to work out what different scientists say. And in the end, I've been told, yeah, it's kind of, they know what they're talking about, but they all use their own kind of terms.
Yeah, so there's not like a standard terminology that just, that is the way of describing some of these changes in I guess mutations change. Yeah.
Only because I kept searching, I thought there must be something on the internet that kind of clearly says, when do you use change? When do you use mutation? But also it's changing all the time, the terminology. But I think that the fact that they now say pathogenic variant is probably a also helping. I don't know though, because
I have to say I don't know I certainly don't know the difference. We've got a new participant here, and is it Neka? Is that how we pronounce your name? At the moment we're talking about well, the theme is patient participation. Sue has got you're not actually the patient as such, you're the parent of the patient with Pitt-Hopkins syndrome, which is a rare, we've heard, it's a rare, what do we call it? A change?
Neurodevelopmental disorder.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Sue. So that's what we're talking about at the moment. But in the kind of broad theme is like, are there barriers to patient participation? Is participation, the sort of starting point really is participation the answer to patient participation, especially the answer to furthering genomics or genomics, however you want to say it. And as we've heard already, there's no right or wrong. There's no, there's no absolute benchmark of terminology here. So welcome, Neka. I'm going to go for there. Anyone else want to chime in? Any thoughts? Have we got anyone that works in the field here, or are we all patients? Are we any scientists here? Any biologists that can maybe correct us on the terminology? No? Okay, well, we'll just keep going.
Sorry.
Go on then.
Sorry, I've got an issue with my video at the moment. But no, I am a biologist, I guess.
Yeah.
Not sure I could help that much, but it's always interesting to kind of, you do the science regarding whatever kind of disorder or disease. And I think we're very often, like when you're wet lab, you're very far removed from the patient sometimes.
Yeah.
So it's always really, for me, really important to actually kind of get back to why we're actually doing this thing. So I'll be able to pick up some bits and pieces from you guys.
So you feel kind of alienated away, you don't, it's quite a long, I mean, is that just the way it goes? I mean, can you have patients in a biological laboratory? Or, I mean, what's the answer to actually kind of having more of a connection? Is it just having more conversations? What would you say?
I do think it's the conversation piece. I mean, in a day-to-day, I think in terms of getting patients, it would be like if your institute or your university facilitates some sort of event for patients. So I used to do some work on Down syndrome.
Right.
And just fortunately, the group that I was working in at the time had links to patients groups. So like once a year, we would throw an event for patients involved in that study. And that was the only time we had a real interaction. But it was a great experience for both of us. So it would be like the scientists and then individuals with Down syndrome, and then depending on kind of their age and severity, their carers or family members. And it was like a really great opportunity to kind of just have a chit chat. And they became a lot more aware of what we were doing, why we're doing it, and we kind of understood things from their perspective, like even simple things like terminologies.
This is what we kind of came on. Like terminologies can be confusing. Do you want to say a bit about that, Neka?
Yeah, so another example is with Down syndrome. So before this, I hadn't worked with Down syndrome. I did that kind of other genetics based projects, but not Down syndrome. And I would say, call it a disease, for instance. And I think around my circles, nobody would think otherwise. But it's only when I started to interact with patient groups, I realized, oh, actually, no, it's not a disease. A person has Down syndrome rather than it being a disease. So kind of things like that, just kind of us being a bit more aware and understanding, which I think we lack when we don't actually have a dialogue with patients. We just become really lab focused and dealing with our DNA and, you know, pipetting solutions and stuff like that.
I mean, could you say a little bit about what you do on a day-to-day basis? That this is like a, you know, this is quite a lay audience, let's say. So
yeah, sure.
You know, keep it simple for us, please.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So at the moment, I've actually moved away from the work. So when I was doing the work on Down syndrome, that was my postdoctoral research. So the bit I did just after my PhD. And at the moment, I am focused on gene editing. And I'm the head of facility that kind of, you know, organizes a lot of gene editing experiments for our institute. So I'm less lab-based at the moment, but my team are all lab-based.
Cool. Okay, you're nodding a lot, Evie. Have you got any questions, any thoughts on this?
No, I was just, it was interesting to think about, like the fact that like that divide between patients and scientists or researchers. And then it made me think about recruitment as well. So like, how do you get, you know, patients more involved or take part in these studies? I think Margot at the beginning was talking about she was offered to take part in one once, and I've got a couple of, I'm an identical twin, and then two of my friends are also identical twins separately, and because they were both pairs were born in the UK, they were both entered from birth into a twin study and you know, as part of this to study if there were any other like variations throughout their life and things like that. But because I wasn't born in the UK, we never heard about it, and it wasn't until I met them that I knew that such a thing was happening. So it's interesting to see, like, at what point do you try and get people involved at the stage, and like what are the best mechanisms for getting involved? So I think in the UK, because we have a National Health Service, it was something that the doctors maybe were a bit more clued up on and like offered it at that point. But yeah.
Well, I should say we are going out to the whole world, so that hopefully we've got some. It's probably a bit early for the, you know, for the American continent to pick up, but it'll be interesting to see if we've got on the chat on the Twitter feed any thoughts about what it's like in other countries. But I guess what you're saying, you'd expect the NHS maybe to coordinate that, you know, bring the patients to the research. Are the NHS doing enough? Could they do it better when it comes to UK context? Anyone got any experience of other countries?
I just had a question actually, maybe for Sue, which was she's saying that she's head of the UK charity, but is also working in the Netherlands and involved with the team there. So I also wondered whether Brexit's had an impact now on how that science and information is shared and how that's all going.
I don't know. I'm actually, you know, wondering that myself. And I'm trying, you know, I'm trying to find out. I've been trying to contact someone because of knowing of some interest for research here, and also knowing some interest for research in the UK. I want to see if there's any way, you know, they're saying it's not going to affect. I mean, that's what we've been told by the government.
Yeah.
But I would like to actually challenge that and see if it, you know, challenging it, hopefully meaning it's possible. But I don't know. I say I'm, you know, we've only got represent about 100 families in the UK. Though there's possibly about 300. So, you know, we're a very, very tiny charity and we're all volunteers. So, but, you know, particularly the research into the breathing anomalies is very, very important in many families. And that's certainly what we've been trying to do when it comes to research. But the natural history is also very much needed. And then, you know, for research when they need biomarkers and things like that. Again, we just need a lot more information.
I mean,
Pitt Hopkins was actually
yeah.
first, named after Dr. Pitt and Dr. Hopkins, who wrote a paper in 1978. So it's been all that time, but between 1978 and 2007, when the blood test came out, only about 7 or 8 cases were written up about. So they've come an awful long way in just 13, 14 years, but well, 13 years, I suppose, but we've got a long way to go. We're just at the beginning.
And is most of the research happening in the UK with such a small patient cohort? You'd imagine that you'd want to connect internationally quite a lot.
Yeah, there's the foundation in the States. There's different research going on there. And funny enough, they're doing some on the biome, which and fetal transplant, which is I was listening to earlier on here. So yes, there's different research going on, but we're particularly in the UK as a charity interested. Yeah, we knew we're too tiny to do too much, but so we were concentrating on the dysfunctional autonomic nervous system and the breathing anomalies, because we know that that's day to day what's affecting children and their families.
As a charity and as I guess a group of parents as well, were you able to sort of drive that research and kind of get the you know, actually able, you know, to say this is what needs to be researched, or is that very much up to the researchers? What's the relationship there in terms of, you know?
We've raised some money for some research, which we just before Brexit, no, not Brexit, sorry, just before the pandemic hit.
Yeah,
we'd already committed to some research, which enabled another researcher to get some more funding, and also the Dutch group helped. So there's some research starting, sort of basic science research, but going forward, what we've been shown is that you need to help, you know, get help from funders. So there's something that we're kind of involved in, called the patient-led research hub, where they can't promise that they would be able to get funding, but they kind of help the way forward, you know, because you know, I wouldn't have the faintest idea where to start, and nor would, you know, a lot of the other groups around Europe, but so that, you know, there are people there trying to help us, which is great.
Okay, there's a question from Katie.
Thank you. I have a question to Sue and Naka probably. Do you think that one of the reasons why the research is kind of so slow and the funding is hard to get is because there is almost like a lot of people have an almost stigmatized view towards the whole field? Because at least from my relatives, I've come across a situation where a lot of them wouldn't even want to have the test, wouldn't want to have their DNA analyzed, because they're afraid of what they may find out, and they see that living without that knowledge for them is somehow a better option. Could it be that that is kind of stifling the whole progress, and also, since less people are as much interested, maybe that also impacts funding? What do you think?
I mean, this is something that comes up quite a lot in, you know, this idea about, you know, this knowledge being there present in the genes, but is it a knowledge that we really want to actually uncover? Or, you know, that also, you know, have people got a right to not know about it as well? And have that, I guess, it only comes out when you know, when such a mutation occurs. What do you think, Sue? Any thoughts on that?
Well, with Pitt Hopkins, it's normally de novo. So
say that again. Sorry.
It's normally de novo. It normally just happens. It's not inherited.
Okay, so it's
there are
yeah.
Some cases mosaic, you know, parents having a mosaic case, which then causes a child to have a chance of having Pitt Hopkins, you know, very high chance of having. Well, no, if they were mosaic, then they've got a high chance. But the likelihood of a parent having mosaicism is thought to be very low. But so with our parents, you know, they want to know the diagnosis. And sometimes it's just, so difficult because of, geneticists are so busy, and the waiting lists are terribly long. I'm waiting actually to hear from one parent today who's been, on this sort of journey for about a year, having considered Pitt-Hopkins syndrome, to actually get to getting the results today of yes or no. And for some people, it's been even longer than that. And yet other people, like with us, Christopher was in a research project right at the very beginning. We didn't even know he'd been tested, but we were one of the, we didn't realise it at the time, but he was one of the first 16 to be diagnosed back in 2007.
So it's actually quite complex to actually make the diagnosis and find.
I think it's getting easier now with the whole genome and sequencing and everything when that's available. But you first of all got to get to a geneticist for them to consider that. But before that, it had to be someone had to know about it to give them consider Pitt-Hopkins syndrome to give them the right panel of tests.
So the first barrier,
more serious, more severely affected children at first were the ones that were picked up, more likely to be picked up, I think. But,
okay, so but it's not
I
necessarily.
do understand what you're talking about, though, because I've gone to other. I've gone to like I'm part of Eurodis, and I'm an EPAG, which is a patient advice with. I'm an EPAG member with ERN. You know about ERN? Oh dear. ERN are European Reference Networks, and the idea is to connect specialists and clinicians around Europe. Sadly, because of Brexit, the UK has been taken out of that, but not the EPAG members, not the patient and parent groups. And it's so that someone had a rare cancer in Spain, but the expertise was in Sweden. That rather than someone thinking, oh yeah, I think I've heard of someone, there'd actually be a network. So there are these different like I'm part of Ithaca, which is one for children and adults with kind of on the whole, so it's kind of syndrome type disability, but also congenital ones. But with us there's about over 2,000 conditions that would be in that, and there's no way we can cover that. So they have the ERNs, they have all the doctors connected, and then they have EPAGs, which are patient advisory groups, and then we're invited or asked to join them, and then through that Eurodis. You've heard of Eurodis? Yes.
Some have, some haven't. So,
oh dear.
Yeah.
Well, Eurodis is a big organisation to help with, with rare diseases. That's what the RD is, and they have a lot of training, and they help patient groups and lots of other things. But one of the things is they have schools, and at one of the schools, which was in Paris a few years ago, the Winter School that was known as, that we did have a geneticist actually from the UK talking to us about these problems, about what do you do if you do this and you can see there's a gene that could cause breast cancer. Do you tell them so they're worried? But if you tell that person, then all the extended family also, and then they might not want to know. And yet if somebody is talking about in the family, they're going to hear about it, and goodness, it's a minefield of. It is
a real
I know
minefield.
exactly. So when it comes to our children, when you've got a child that's not walking, not talking, not able to sit, because Christopher couldn't sit till he was about 3, not get into the sitting position himself and stay there at 3. You of course want to know what's wrong, because maybe there's something you can do. You just don't know. You don't know. If you know what your child's condition is, you could maybe know that in the future there might not with Pitt-Hopkins syndrome, but that there might be a heart condition, or there might be something that early on you could be addressing. Wouldn't like for instance, Down syndrome for so many years. I couldn't understand when I was younger, when I heard about them dying from heart problems and or lung, and it was because they, years ago they weren't deemed to have the right to have the operation, which as a result over the years has shortened their lives, which is absolutely terrible. but so parents want to know normally.
Yeah.
But that is different from having anybody having the genome looked at and then discover, wanting to know there is something there in the future. Just like with the fact that there's many known things like Huntington's disease, where I think you can't actually be tested until you're 18, because you have to be of the age to actually make that decision. I want to know, or I don't want to know. It's a goodness of geneticists have to cope with. It's amazing what they have to, all these things they have to be aware of and know what's the right thing to do.
Absolutely. Neka, have you got any views on this about the question of the access to the knowledge? There's also some other points as well. The thing about Talkaoke, we can go in any kind of direction we want to go. The idea about if you've got a genetic disorder like Down syndrome, does that mean you're not eligible for treatment? As in the past, you wouldn't be eligible for treatment on a heart condition. So there's so many different ways we can go. It's kind of up to you really where you want to go. But have you got a response to any of the things we've been talking about, Neka?
Yeah, so I guess I think basically is more kind of reiterating what Sue said. I think there is an element. So now I'm speaking kind of broadly from research and funding. I will say that there is a thing where if a disease is particularly rare, it is harder to get money to research it. And I think it's just about kind of the global impact.
Yeah.
That's to some extent, the global impact. There's also, depending on some disorders, there is also a financial aspect. Like if you think about some neglected tropical diseases, they're very widely, numbers wise, there's loads of people affected, but funding is still small. And I think part of that is an economic factor in terms of, pharmaceutical companies maybe not making as much from kind of looking into it a bit more. So I think there's different elements, but I think often how many people are impact does affect how likely you are to get funding for something. Yeah. So I think that maybe plays a bigger role rather than if people want to know.
Yeah, I mean,
because like he said, I think if it really does affect an individual or somebody's child, then there is definitely kind of that desire to want to know from that regard. And I wouldn't say that directly impacts us being able to get funding to research that. So I think it's more of a how many people are affected. But you do get kind of pockets of charities, who are really focused on getting that funding out there.
Yeah.
So that obviously helps a lot when it comes to rarer disorders.
Is it a question about, it's the number of people affected multiplied by the size of the bank balance that they've got to actually spend on it? So that people, people in areas with more cash have got more access to research.
I would like to think in general, no. Especially where you have kind of centralized pockets of money, Like we do have a lot of funding bodies who I do think are not kind of taking that view. They are kind of more thinking about how do we benefit people as much as we can. I wouldn't be surprised if there are pockets of individuals who do have a lot of money, so they could kind of be more like benefactors of particular types of research that they're interested in. I'm sure that does happen, but I think in general the larger governing bodies are, cross fingers, are thinking about how can we try and do the most good.
Okay, so in a way, when it comes to funding bodies, at least they're trying to think about how do we how to have the most impact in their research.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, do people agree with that? Do they think that we've got that right? And maybe we can take that back to our central question: is in terms of impact, how do we actually get that patient participation going in terms of like, deciding what to research, or trying to get that also the information from patients and the experiences from patients. Did you have a question there, Evie? No? Okay. Where are we going to take this conversation? That. Rebecca, you've just come online. Have you got a question?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
I can't see myself because I've hidden myself. There
we can
go.
see you for sure.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Like, how do we get patients in? Because it's one of those things where we can all say, oh, well, it's just education. You just educate people and that'll work. But it has to be, I think we have to really concentrate on like how targeted it is. So it's really interesting listening to you, Sue, on you talk on like how you're trying to bring all these not corporations, all these different organizations together to try and actually bring it forward. And like you were saying, Evie, that you had identical twin, but you didn't know about this, about these stories. So I do wonder if it is just the case of setting up we've got Health Education England, Genomics England, or is it worth like something that you need to like put in the curriculum, and start educating people, start educating children, and then it will filter up or down from there.
I mean, how often do schools visit labs, and how often and when they visit labs, are they encouraged to be participants, or just, like getting shown around? So that's a really interesting question. Like, how could we actually radically change this interface between education and research, and like treatment of diseases as well, and the health side too. So that's a really interesting question. Evie, I'm going to come back to you as well. As an identical twin, I would have thought you got harassed all the time as you're like the perfect human guinea pig for all kinds of research. Have you been approached to be in research as an identical twin?
I think not officially. So I think so there was I think I had an allergy, like a strange allergy that my sister hadn't had, and then when I had gone to the doctor, that was a point at which he said, oh gosh, you'd have the perfect control partner. But again, it wasn't something that was followed up on. So I don't know. And now I think there's a point at which perhaps you come a little bit too old for it, like the terrorism, or sort of almost the big data. And I think that's kind of definitely a growing field at the moment in genomics and biodata, that actually it's not just data on one person or sequencing a genome, or it's having that like information over a lifetime, and then also multiple people having it. And then I guess with it, if you have enough information about a person, however much you anonymize it, there's a point at which you might be able to tell who the person is. So yeah, that's something that I think has always been a bit, that is starting to become a bit of an issue, both in the field of genomics, but also in big data, just as a concept as well.
Is it really possible to be truly anonymous? As an identical twin, you're already narrowed down to 1 in 1,000 people. Female identical twin, 1 in 2,000 people. So we're ready. I mean, I'm not going to go any further, but whatever this allergy is, you probably, a couple of extra data points, and we know exactly who we're talking about. So where do we want to go with this conversation? Do we want to talk about the idea of bringing in schools and young people and getting them to understand that being a patient isn't just about, being treated? There's more to it than that. We want to talk about the data, and can you be truly anonymous, and what about, how does big data intersect, with all these things, and with the knowledge about, talking about this thing about, do we want to only reveal diagnoses at the age of 18 when young people are ready for it? So many different ways we can go with this conversation. It's kind of the whole point of Talkaoke. It's kind of up to you. So someone give us a steer, give us a pointer. That could be anyone in the Zoom, in the room, even you watching on Vimeo, people, give us a steer, tell us where you want us to take this conversation, and join in as well. You'll see a Zoom link down underneath that, so just hit that Zoom link. You're welcome to come and get involved. Where are we going to go with this conversation? Margot.
I'm just interested in this whole idea about, you know, revealing the diagnosis to young people before 18 or not revealing. I mean, how would that kind of impact on them? Yeah, is, you know, just how, you know, because I have heard some stories. She's actually like a public person. She's a blogger. And she was talking about how she was given, it wasn't a genetic disease, it was something to do with her spine. It was, or maybe it was genetic, actually, I don't remember. But anyway, that really, you know, hearing that diagnosis really meant that it really impacted on her mental health really badly. And she kind of spent, you know, when she finally managed to get a handle on things, then she became a big campaigner for, you know, for mental health firstly, but then also an advocate for people with this disorder that she had with her, to do with her spine. But she said that, you know, knowing that diagnosis had really changed how she interacted with the world and how she thought of herself and that kind of stuff. And I wonder whether it's ever possible to keep young people, children, you know, unaware of, you know, is it healthy or is it not healthy to let them know what the diagnosis is and the extent of it, or maybe there's some information that we can kind of drip feed as they get older. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, once again, I think that's a point as well. Quite often when we're in the real life space in the Genomics Festival, this is the point where we try and attract a genetic counselor over to the table and get their perspective. You know, how do you actually deal with some of these things which is about you that you can't actually change, but you have to sort of come to terms with? Is that something that a young person would be able to deal with? Who makes the decision? These are all really, really big questions. I guess it depends from disorder to disorder, but we don't really have a kind of, or do we have a protocol for this? Where's the genetic counselor when you need one? Then there's not enough of them around. Oh, we've lost Neko. We could have got a final thought from her, but I was just not fast enough.
Is a genetic counselor a real thing though, or is that made up thing?
What?
A genetic counselor?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, they're very well trained. You have to be. It's an incredibly. I wanted to be one at one point, but realized that I don't have the fortitude to be able to communicate to patients very difficult conversations that you have to have about some of the topics we've been having. For example, the thing of, like, you know, if you're talking to them, you know, how far do they want to know going through that family tree, you know, and will it impact you know, the children and how they interact. The big thing that I always found incredibly difficult is when they have siblings and when one child is not affected and one is, and how that goes through. That's a really difficult thing for parents and also for the child itself. I think this is a problem because a lot of these genetic diseases, like they say, you find out when, if something's very wrong, you find out as a baby. Well, you don't, but your parents do. And then it's how do you, there's a problem with, like, there's a known problem of how those children are brought up. I don't say problem like it's anyone's fault, but like, how do you treat these children differently, especially if it's something like, I know it's not tested for a birth Huntington's, but especially if it's something like Huntington's that doesn't come into your been up very early doesn't affect for like many years.
Yeah,
I just always find that, you know, harrowing. It's like, how on earth would you do that? Especially if you're identical twin, you say one, have you got an allergy, or your sister doesn't have an allergy? Like,
Evie's got the allergy.
Yeah,
sister doesn't have the allergy.
Like, at least it's just something like that. But could you imagine if it was broader? How, you know, you would have treated your sibling or how your parents would have treated you.
So yeah. It's a pretty tough job. It is a real job. There's a lot of people,
but there
out
are not
doing.
enough. That is very true. There are not enough.
They're not enough of these people around. Any thoughts on this? Katie, you look like you're about to, yeah.
Yeah, but could it be that one of the reasons why there is lack of these people, lack of these genetic counselors, or in general people in the field, is that I don't think that the general population has made a hard decision on whether we should investigate and we should know, or whether it's better not to know. I mean, even if we still have the choice whether to find out more about ourselves or not, we don't have any general direction which we would have decided that it's a better option. I mean, I think that many, even like on this talk from us, we would probably agree that it's better to know. Sorry, but other people, they are afraid. For example, yeah, maybe I will be trying to find out more about my disease, but I'll find out that my dad's not my dad, or like there is a lot of knowledge, a lot of information that may come out by accident, which people don't even expect. And it comes an ethical question: is it better to know, or is it better not to know? Especially when not all of those things will have a direct impact on. Or let's say they find out that they have got a gene which can cause a disorder late in life, but it didn't come from one of their parents. So again, like even if it happens fairly rarely, it makes a lot of people afraid of it happening to them. So people who have the disorders, usually they'll be much more open to finding out more about where it came from. But like the general population who are kind of unaware of it, they just look at the part which can affect them emotionally, and they will not see so much benefit in the health area, because they don't see anything wrong with themselves. And a lot of those people, I think a lot of people working in the field may not have any issues themselves. They may just be curious about the subject. But if we don't have a direction, how can we make people curious about the subject?
I mean, it is a bit of a conundrum, because I think these ethical questions are so huge that it is up to the whole of society to be part of this debate. But it's really hard to get that debate going.
Yes,
when the only really people with knowledge are the scientists and those with one particular genetic disorder, or the parents of those people. So have you got a view on this? Do you think the debate could be wider when it comes to genomics or genetics as a wider field?
I'm sure it can, but as you say, it's trying to contact people, because most, say for our parents, they probably never even thought about genetics until they had a child that, then they were like told they'd be referred to the genetic department, and even then they might think, well, why at first? I mean, I think when Christopher's 29, he'll be 30 this year,
right? And
we were living in Munich at the time, and when they said they were going to send us to genetics, or the genetic department, I at first I thought, oh, what would they be able to tell us? And then of course I realized a bit more, and my husband explained it to me, but I think a lot of people would never think of it, or realize the importance of seeing a genetic counselor if they've already had a child with a disability. Particularly, I mean, like with Pitt-Hopkins syndrome, although it's very, very unlikely they would have another child with Pitt-Hopkins, it is possible, and it's very important that they see a genetic counsellor, and all the issues are discussed. I mean, like with me, we didn't know what Christopher had when I had my third child, and say Christopher was our second. I've got an older son as well, so. I knew if I had a child with Down syndrome, I would never consider personally terminating a pregnancy. So I couldn't see the point of being tested. And then people said to me, this is years ago, said to me, well, you should have considered it for Christopher, and even more when I then went on to have Nathan, my youngest. And I said, well, no, they couldn't have told us anything because we didn't know what Christopher's problem was. He was almost 16 before he got his diagnosis. So I think it's very much an individual's, family's decision as to what they need to be. Would be great to be more aware of, and I suppose that's a GP's job as well to tell them. We weren't in that situation because we were living in Germany, so it wasn't quite the same system.
Yes, there's a different system.
And it was all in German, and our German wasn't very good. And the genetic report, of course, was all in German. But I remember that at the genetic appointment, they were discussing him, and they actually were doing it in English, which was very kind, so that I could understand. And they were pointing out different things about his face and different dysmorphic features. And then this geneticist said, "Oh, but he's a beautiful baby." In fact, our children sometimes, one of the ladies in the States, who I started a support group with many years ago, she says that our children are picked handsome because their feature. One of the features is cupid bow top lip, very full bottom lip, very often widely spaced teeth, and therefore they're very neat teeth very often, and high cheekbones, deep set eyes, pronounced with their eyebrows. It's thicker here and thinner. I mean, some of the girls absolutely stunning, and some of the boys as well. But they were looking at all these dysmorphic features and then realized what it must sound like to me, and said, and I always remember that she felt bad that they were pointing out all these different things. But of course, I'd not been aware of that. No one had been aware that he had dysmorphic features. I mean, certainly our GP hadn't noticed it, even though for a year before we finally got to the Kinderzentrum in Munich, I had been concerned, and I'd been told I was an over anxious mother and he was heavy and lazy, even though he was fully breastfed, no food until a year, because he was reaching, and I was being told, well, if he's not reaching for food, he's not ready. So he certainly wasn't overweight, but that was the excuse doctors were giving to me. And then I was told he may never walk, may never talk. So a bit of a shock at that time.
Can I just ask you, because I was just saying that was quite a few years ago, do you think the relationship between doctors and patients has changed since then, or do you think there's still this kind of, it seems like it initially a slightly dismissive kind of response, or that to me, I feel, I mean, hopefully there's some clinicians out there, there's some GPs, whatever, watching this, but hopefully that's improved. But I mean,
I'm sure it has, but I have still been hearing it. I don't know. Well, I'm trying to think. I think it's been picked up much earlier now. I mean, I lived in Germany, I was coming over to the UK for the developmental checks as well, because I wanted to make sure it was in English, that I understood what was happening in Germany. And my GP, well, the GP that did the developmental checks wasn't concerned, or at least she said she wasn't. But she thought, well, if the Germans aren't concerned, then it can't be anything. But our health visitor was very concerned, and she was agreeing with me. But I couldn't get beyond that stage. But that was in 92, 93, so it's a long time ago. But it is still difficult, and it's because, of course, doctors are so busy.
Yeah.
But it still is hard to get those referrals, or But I'm sure it has improved a great deal.
I mean, here at the Festival of Genomics, we're always complaining that we've not got enough doctors and clinicians around the table. This time they've got a fairly robust excuse this year. But it would be nice to get the opinion of the doctors. Eva, you got a point?
Yes, I do. I'm afraid I actually have to do my final thought as well, I'm afraid. But I was just thinking it was interesting what Sue just said, and it was a theme that also came up in what Katie said, because I was thinking back to, I wonder how much the public understand, I think we're at the beginning of the changing attitudes of the public towards genetics and genetic science. So I remember, you know, in the 90s and the early noughties, you know, the kind of layman's understanding of genetics was probably GMO crops and the risk that there'd be mutations and there'd be like becoming invasive species, or you know, there was quite a lot of hyperbole around it. Then we get into the 2010s and CRISPR is created, and it sort of stays in the conversation from 2015. It's kind of hitting more of the science news, and we're just getting to the point where people are starting to understand it a lot more and starting to be clued up. But even so, I think even in and obviously CRISPR allows you to make really small genetic changes rather than just trying to make random genetic mutations as was GMO. So it's supposed to be much more precise, not safer. But still, I think in the EU, at least, you know, any kind of crop modified by CRISPR is still counted as in the same class as GMOs. It's still counted as something that you don't want to use in agriculture. Obviously, that's very different to biomedical science, but I think we're maybe just at the beginning of that turn in understanding with the public. I think there's quite a few stuff on Netflix now as well, actually. I think
there's stuff on Netflix. What's on Netflix?
I think the Fox Mind Explained has got a series talking about at least an episode talking about CRISPR. Right. So it's starting to hit the mainstream news, which is exciting, and in kind of a sort of a cool way, as opposed to maybe the slightly in you know, rather than just in education or just in kind of biomedical news, which is obviously really interesting, but doesn't capture the public imagination in the same way, I don't think. Okay,
does everyone here, I just want to check, know what CRISPR is? There's a nod and there's a shake of head. So can you just quickly explain CRISPR, Evie?
So CRISPR won the Nobel Prize last year. We're in 2020. Yeah. And it basically it's the layman's explanation, I guess, is that it allows you to really use RNA to basically snip out sections of genetic data. So it allows you to make really, really small changes. And before that, I think we were just allowing for genetic mutations to arrive through either using radiation or you know, much broader, so you weren't able to target a specific gene. So CRISPR is a way of targeting very specific parts of the genome. And I'm sure I've explained that badly. So if there's anyone who wants to jump on the Zoom chat to explain that better, I would like it. But that's my understanding. Well, I mean,
that's probably quite a good way to get more punters in. Is just to like explain the science wrong, and then somebody will come. I did notice there is a point on the chat. From Sam talking about genetic counseling. Genetic counseling is also about explaining to the parents what are the risks of getting a second or third child with the same disease as the first one. It's a very hard thing to do. Sam, if you want to jump on the Zoom, we'd love to talk to you. But also, if there's anybody out there using CRISPR, we want to find out a bit more about that as well. Thank you, Evie.
Thank you.
Let me give you a round of applause. And there she goes. So hopefully some of these people watching on the Zoom will come and join in, because this is about people power, but without people, there's no power. So hopefully we'll get some traction on the Zoom. Where do we want to take this conversation? Do we want to talk about like how this knowledge kind of permeates into the whole of society? Do you want to talk about go back to that question about genetic counseling? Do we want to sort of talk about the kind of this kind of fear element, you know, certainly around back in the day? Katie, you've got a point.
I think that I don't want to be mistaken. I think Rebecca mentioned about the education. I think that the education is the right way forward, because very often if we just let the public find out things themselves, very often they can find out wrong and build their first beliefs on top of that. And then it'll be a hard work to try to persuade them that, you know, it's otherwise. And again, it feels like a lot of people are afraid to even touch it with a long stick because of all the ethical questions running around it. Like, okay, some people say, you know, it will start this way by finding out, but then we'll start designing babies, and we already had situations where I believe in UK there was a child that they used part of the genome from a third person to prevent some mitochondrial disease, and there was also a couple of cases in China as well. So, and I was talking with my friends about this as well, and I mentioned that probably in science, no never works as an answer. It happens anyway. Maybe instead of thinking whether something should be done or not, we should assume it will be done and then see how to do it the best possible way.
Yeah.
Because someone somewhere around the world from 8 billions will anyway end up doing it, whether others like it or not. So when it comes to a lot of these ethical questions, I think that our society loses a lot by avoiding them instead of taking them head on and sorting it out. Like even with HIV, before there was like a lot of stigma, and there was a lack of funding, there was lack of understanding how it spreads, and a lot of those things. And once it became more public, people became more aware of it. A lot of it has changed. So maybe there could be some parallels with this, that since a lot of these disorders caused are extremely rare, so the amount of population directly affected and aware of it is fairly small. Like, so maybe education is the key, but then what is the right education?
Okay, well, there's a lot of questions there. I'm going to start off with the thing you said at the beginning, that we're kind of reluctant to have that debate because it's a bit too complicated. So there's that point, but also, you know, this question about, okay, education is good, but what is the right form of education? But then there's the other point as well, that have we got our kind of ethical setup right? Because even if the thing is banned here in the UK, or if it's generally, you know, considered not a good idea, somebody's going to be doing it anyway. Some rogue scientists will be doing it. So should we be reframing our ethics about how to deal with these things rather than whether it should be done or not? So it's up to you where you want to take this discussion. I would encourage those watching on Vimeo, please come on the Zoom. We need more people we need your opinion. I've actually missed out a couple of points on the chat. I've just realized because the chat is coming in two different flows. Anyway, where do we want to go with this conversation? Any thoughts? Do you feel like that you need to be more educated, Margot?
I definitely feel like maybe, you know, science is something that I've never been massively encouraged to delve into. I mean, I grew up in Poland, so maybe it's slightly different how things are done there. But yeah, it was just like always like lacking resources to kind of inspiring people to consider that as a career. And I feel like in the UK there's way more outreach happening. I mean, obviously there may be, you know, probably should be more and stuff, but certainly that was never a kind of a viable career. But saying this, my sister's a chemist, so she's done okay. And she works in the lab, but that's my only connection to anything vaguely scientific. And my parents could never understand why she understands chemistry, but I don't, as if that was something that supposedly was passed on in genes. Well, it wasn't.
Okay, so this is an interesting take. I bet they've never discussed this at the Festival of Genomics. Is science itself a genetic? Is there any genetic element in the ability to understand science, the ability to understand biology or genetics, genomics? Is that actually passed through the genes? Why have we not isolated these genes so far? Any thoughts on that? Is it part of the gene? Could it be caused by a genetic anomaly? The fact that you don't really.
I have an idea that probably a lot of these questions and these problems arise, because we are led to believe that all of us are equal, with equal opportunities, equal abilities, and so on. And genomics pretty much throws that idea to the bin. It says that you know, you are born with certain things which are more or less likely to affect you. And whether you like it or you don't like it, whatever your belief system is, whatever your idea about it is, it works like that, and that's it. And I guess a lot of people are afraid to find out that they have something that they would like not to have, but they cannot do anything about it.
I mean, does this science of genomics mean that we're not born equal? Because that's what you're saying.
Okay, I can think of an example. Let's say, all of us over the time we make it so common that by the time we're 18, we get kind of genomic readout, and we find out what potential problems we may have, what potential disorders our children may have, and so on. And I mean, even I would consider that it's likely that for people going into relationships, it could become a topic on which they even base some of their decisions. So, and again, it's not something one can change. So I think it's one of the big reasons why some people may be afraid of this kind of awareness of what's happening. For me personally, I'm excited at the idea, and I hope it will happen, because in my opinion, whatever is the truth, knowing is better than not knowing. But I find that I'm usually alone, or fairly lonely, with that idea, at least in my circle. And
but my question is, does this lead to inequality, or has everybody got kind of some?
I think it leads to inequality, but it leads to better equity, because we find out that same pants don't fit everyone. So we need to adapt somehow, and now we're trying just the same way we do with education, push everyone through exactly the same course, and hope that a genius will come out of the blue. But I think here that awareness could end up helping us to deal with those problems, whereas being unaware just, I don't know, makes it more interesting maybe for some people. I don't know.
Okay, so we've discovered in this session that the same pants don't fit everybody. I think that's a good point. I'm just going to see if anyone's responded to that on the chat. No, but maybe it's it's going to take a bit of time for that bombshell to hit the Vimeo audience. What do we think about this question about it? Have we got equality wrong? Equality doesn't mean everyone's the same. It means everyone's different. But yeah, I mean, how does that play out when it comes to genetics? So have you got a view on this?
I was just thinking of a charity called Same But Different. I mean, we are all different, and we don't have the same opportunities. Coming from disabled children, say children with Pitt-Hopkins syndrome, having in different places having access to different therapies that might help them. Physiotherapy or music therapy or hippotherapy, OT, waiting lists and things, and that's going to affect them greatly. But in the general population, anyway, I mean, when I was at university, my parents were, I can't think of the word, but they were assessed as to how much they had to pay towards my grant. But otherwise, I was able to go to university where it's entirely different now. I mean, I know people get, money, but then it's whether they're going to be in a position to pay it back, and the pressures that would put on them. Where I say with our son, my husband works for European organisation here, and we've been very fortunate that we've been able to put, you know, our oldest and youngest through university without them in having to have any grants or any loans from anywhere. But for others, it's not the same.
Yeah.
So it's never the same. So it's meant that, you know, that for Nathan's been able to do a forensic science MSc, whereas that wasn't something my husband could do when he finished his biochemistry degree. You know, and that's just us, you know, just in our family.
Yeah,
I mean,
but I mean,
so
I think it's a snapshot of the world in a way that it's ridiculous to suggest we've all got equal opportunities. It's changing all the time. It's not the same as it was 30 years ago. And it's not the same for different people. Even in the UK, there's a huge variance of what opportunities people have got. But at the same time, you know, what is equality then if it's so blatantly not there? Is it something we strive towards? Is it about I mean, and yeah, does this fit into the world of genomics as well? These are questions that that's my job, just to ask questions, keep asking questions. Rebecca,
well,
yeah, go on.
Yes, hello.
Have you got a view on this?
Yeah, I think it is really interesting, because I think some of it is actually just acknowledging that there isn't equality, you know, and that sucks because no one wants to say that.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, have to admit that different groups are wrongly treated differently, and that has effects, and that we can't just get to equality just by going, yeah, we can do it. It's like, no, it has to be a systematic thing. And especially in genomics, there is, you know, genomics has a dark past of, you know, using certain things to go, well, you know.
Yeah, justifying.
Yeah, people use, like, people will go just down a level. They'll go from, you know, how you look to where you're from to all the way, and they'll be like, oh, we can use your genes now because that determines everything. And it's like, no and no. But yeah, I think it is the thing of like from quality is going to equitable access. So giving everyone access to these programs like, you know, the 100,000 genomes, and making it available, you know, that everyone has, you know, if people want to get their stuff sequenced, they can. But then that goes into data privacy issues, and then also it will go into for what cause, because that is quite easy when you say, oh, just get your genome sequence, and then everyone kind of goes to like, oh, 23andMe or these things for ancestry, rather than, but how about we use it for healthcare?
Yeah,
you know, which I find interesting, because you know, if you're a science background, you probably have a very different view to a layperson on like being excited about being able to find out about your genetic background. You know, I bought a kit for my mum for ancestry, and I was really annoyed that it only gave me very vague things of, you know, maybe 5% South European. I was like, no, give me everything. I want to know. But that's not the case for a lot of people, and we have to adjust to, like, is it because people are scared of that information? Is it because they don't know about it? And how we can use it going forward? You know, it's not just a case of making people have this information. It's knowing them, also knowing how they can action it and how it can be used in a wider area.
Okay, we've got a new face to the table, to the virtual table. At the moment, we're talking about equality and equity of access to healthcare. Have we really got it in this country? And when it comes to genomics, should we just give everybody their gene sequence, even though people have got different genes? As Katie said, not everyone fits the same pants, which is kind of like our kind of new understanding that, you know, people are all different. So what does equality mean when it comes to accessing healthcare? That's what we're talking about at the moment. So where do we want to go with this conversation? Katie, have you got a response to that, to what people are saying?
That's me. Oh, I'm not sure, to be honest, because my point was not exactly about equal access to the healthcare, but let's say that people become much more aware of genetic disorders, much more aware of impact it can have on their children and so on. And what if one day we get on, you know, dating profiles, no known genetic disorders as kind of a thing that people brag about? So how do you deal with that part? How to, you know, people are afraid to dig into this field because they're afraid that, you know, we already have inequality problems, it'll just make it worse. So how do we use it to make it better instead of worse?
That's a really great point, because I'm afraid I did miss the start of your talk, which is probably why I went off in a completely different way. So I do apologize. Yeah, it is really interesting because, like, we can always say, like, you know, everyone's aware of, like, oh, insurance companies, you know, if they don't know your genetic data. But yeah, then it goes to, like, dating. And then you have to sort of go, well, the conclusion for most people for dating will probably be children. And then you go, have we made a terrible, terrible mistake here by going down that? So it's a really interesting question. Like, how do we make sure people have this data if they want it, but also protect it? Because we like, oh, it's terrible to think, isn't it? No genetic disorders, and people going. I
mean, in a way, it kind of, I mean, we do kind of, you know, we do a kind of ad hoc genetic analysis when we decide, you know, who we're attracted to. Well, we don't really even decide that. It's kind of like, it's in our genes to do the genetic analysis in that kind of, you know, instinctive way, where, I mean, we've got these two gentlemen behind me here on this this screen, and they're going to have different levels of, well, maybe they won't, I don't know, you know, but, you know, let's take these two as an example. You know, they're not living in a kind of, you know, even though we may or may not be able to sequence their genes, we're not living in a genetic vacuum. Even without that sort of like deep genetic knowledge, we're still making some kind of genetic judgment on who they are when it comes at least to the dating game. Anyone want to come back on that, or are we into too dangerous territory now? But that's the whole thing about Talkaoke. We can go wherever we want to go with this.
Tough shout which one of the men on the visualizations I would like to date. It's a tough one.
Yeah, I mean, that's Rick, our visualizer, that's putting these up. That's his choice. And I guess he's gone for what in medical terms you'd call the ectomorph and the endomorph. But anyway,
I think you'd need to explain that, Mikey.
Yeah. I mean,
I'm not. But again, you're in the middle of the table, so I don't know how.
I'm not really. It's not really my job to do the explanation. It's just my job to ask the questions. But have you got a final thought for us, Margot?
No, it has been very, very interesting. Not the kind of usual conversation I'd normally take part in. I'm just interested in the kind of ethics of the you know, of what we can't do, shouldn't do, the DNA, and also how that impacts you know, I don't know, I suppose the progress in science and people's like ordinary lives. So yeah, I mean, I'm probably will come off camera and just listen because it is very interesting, I'm learning
Okay,
loads.
so you're gonna stay involved. That's good. Good stuff. Okay, so we've got a couple of new faces that haven't said anything so far. I'll just kind of tell you the story of where we've kind of gone. We started off with Sue, are you the chair, Sue, of the Pitt-Hopkins syndrome charity?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, Pitt-Hopkins is a rare genetic disorder, but it's not an heritable genetic disorder. We heard a little bit about, how genomics interacts with medicine, and in her case, and then we talked more generally about patient participation and how we had a biologist on who's felt quite alienated from the patients, and I think from her point it was more about inspiration, to have the inspiration and the understanding, from the patient's side of what the experience of living with a genetic disorder. In her case, it was Down syndrome. Then we went a bit more general, and we talked about somehow it led on to ethics anyway. The only way is ethics, as we say on Talkaoke. So it was more. That's right. We were talking about how do we get the public to have more of an understanding of genetics, because it can be quite heavy if you find out that you've got just genetic disorder in your family, or you've got something heritable, or there's a ticking time bomb in your own physiology. So we talked about that a little bit, and then we talked about education. Should we educate people in a different way? And then we talked about equality, and it was this question about equality that we're kind of on now, really. Should we have that genetic information out there? Should it inform our choice of partner? And are we doing that anyway? Because, instinctively we do a kind of genetic analysis. We may not sequence their genes, but we kind of you can see some of the effects of the genes in the individual. So that's where we are right now. If you know Talkaoke, you can take it in any direction. Is it right for dating sites, for example, to have that genetic information? Over to you. Where do you want to take this conversation? Kieran, unmute yourself.
No, I mean, I haven't got much to say, but just this one thing. I think that once you've got information and knowledge, you can't stop it. That's the end of it. So it's going to be on dating sites, but there's also going to be people that think, oh, what a wanker putting that on your site. I'm not dating him. I think things level out a little bit. I mean, I wouldn't date anyone that told me that they had a perfect genetic code. In fact, I think, God, how boring. I don't want to sleep with them. So hopefully it will level out and not become too fascist. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, well, is that the way it will go? That if you're posting up genetic information, you'll kind of be seen as a little bit of a kind of show off.
Well, it's one of those things of like, does it just go straight to Gattaca? Does it go to E6? And then at that point, you'd have to try, from my point of view of, I love epigenetics, and which is the way of your environment interacting with your genes and your genes changing and the expression changing. So I'd say, I would try and argue against, just because your genetics say one thing, it doesn't necessarily always mean, because, as with any disease, even a genetic one, there is this thing of penetrance. And just because you have the gene that says you got this, it might be that actually only 70% of people show it, and to different severities. But that's a really important thing that people need educating about, because it's, you don't want everything to be deterministic and sad, and you've got to really show, like, look, there are all these options, and it's not just ATGC, it's you as a person.
Okay. All right. So deterministic equals sad. There's more to genes. There's more to genes than the kind of Gattaca thing where we just judge everyone by their genes. There's a bit more. There's the environment. There's epigenetics. There's the penetrance as well. And there's something else about the person apart from their genes. But what is that?
Can I just say something, Mikey?
Yeah, sure.
So sorry, I can only stay for a few minutes, but I promise Mikey I'll come in the afternoon session. So, but what I wanted to leave you with this, I don't know if anyone has seen, there's a paper out recently that looked at like 1 million people, and they could tell from using AI, they could distinguish from someone's face whether their politics, whether it was right wing or left wing.
Really?
Republican, yeah, are sort of like conservative or liberal. It's 72% accuracy it could get, which is higher than any other kind of marker. So that, I mean, I have a paper and look through it and see what, but it's quite amazing. And what that might say, that some of the genes that are involved in, and sort of genes or things that are involved in your facial structure might also be involved in your brain structure, which we know that they are, and that might then determine your political outlook.
Right.
So it's
what kind of faith have you got?
It's kind of quite a shocking result, really, if you think about it.
Yeah. Yeah, go on, Kieran.
Well, I mean, just to counter that, Dave, I mean, you're assuming that that's genetics showing someone's politics. I mean, how do you know it's not a facial expression for a lifetime of compassion or non-compassion, or your styling, or the T-shirt you're wearing, just the way you cut your hair? I mean, there are thousands of signifiers. Right? When you said that, I didn't assume it was genetic. I assumed it was about.
Yeah, but I think they're looking at like the facial features, like how far your eyes are apart and that kind of stuff.
But is it how much you smile? There's a good point there. I mean, I don't know, what your politics are, honestly, but does that lead to a different facial expression?
I was watching, I don't know if anyone's seen, there's like a documentary on BBC Two about Trump. And I haven't really watched it, but I just watched like 5 or 10 minutes of it the other day. And all like these people that kind of surround Trump and Trump himself, they just look really strange. Do you know what I mean? Just like the faces look strange. Yeah. Maybe that's just my prejudice. I don't know.
Well, I mean, there is another question here: is how much does prejudice actually play a part here as well when you're judging somebody's beliefs? Because how do you define left or right wing, for example?
Well, yeah, but I mean, you have to look at the methods in the paper, but I think it was pretty straightforward. You'd have to look at that and what that meant. But I think it's really, really interesting. Idea, and I'm not saying that means that you're genetically determined your politics. But I mean, there's lots of potential ways of looking at it, but it kind of does suggest that some things might have a genetic basis that you might not think of having as a genetic basis.
Okay, well, I mean, we don't have to go.
Anyway, I've got to go now. I've got to go now. Sorry for throwing that one in and then running away, but that's what I'm
then we call that the hit and run on Talkaoke.
See you later, guys. I'll see you later. Talk to you later.
All right, thank you. Thanks for that. That's Dave. So what do other people think about that? We talked about voting with your feet, but in the future, will we be voting with our faces? And what does this mean? Do people kind of buy into this idea that you actually can determine somebody's biology by looking at their face, that AI at least can somehow in some undetermined way? Rebecca, have you got a point on this one?
Yeah, so it was interesting what Kieran, what you said, that it's not all genetic. It is obviously people's face, it's how they dress, where they are, all these things. What is really interesting is that this came up in some previous talks, was that sure, AI can determine AI can come up with answers, but the problem is that AI is biased because it's programmed by humans. So, and it's been shown that there is, unless you're really, really careful, this bias can,
Yeah.
you know, lead to, you know, those sort of papers where, well, I don't know if it's right or wrong on that one, but and so that it's just something you've really got to be careful about is how do we use this, who's programming the data, because people have all sorts of, you know, internal biases that they don't think they have, because no one wants to think they're biased. But
it's just a reflection of the researchers' internal bias here. Maybe they were, you know, I mean, just thinking about this, like, if you were to look at the faces of Brexit, we talked earlier on about Brexit, that was just a little detour, but of Brexit supporters versus Remain supporters, as the Brexit supporters tended to be older, a computer could easily just count the number of wrinkles and make us kind of like a guesstimate of Brexit supporter or not. Anyway, but it's not down to me. I've just done a really bad thing, which is like giving my own opinion, which as the host, I'm not really supposed to do. Where do we want to take this? Are these biases kind of, you know, we talked about the kind of the dark past of genetics and genetic studies, and, you know, possibly genomics as well, where those biases have been encoded into value judgments about patients. Are we still stuck with those biases as we move forward, or can we shake them off, or is it just something we've got to live with and we've got to just be a bit more aware of? That's a real pause for thought there. I mean, in a way, that's what we're talking about, is valuing people, aren't we? Whether it comes to dating or choosing their treatment path, or, you know, giving them opportunities. It's about valuing people. And I think everyone would agree that we don't want to value them on the basis of their genes, but we kind of are anyway. Where are we going to take this conversation? I feel like I've just killed it somehow. Somebody help me out here. Maybe we could have a new thread. Let me just check see if there's anything on the chat.
it's really hard to follow up that, because it's one of those things where we just I think as I said earlier, we want everyone to be equal. We want equitable access.
Yeah.
But it's how you go about doing it in a way that actually helps everyone by also acknowledging the biases and the inequity that there is. Yeah.
I mean, we moved away from genomics onto psychology. That's fine. But
I mean, well, that's the thing with genomics. It's an omics. It's got everything in it.
Yeah.
You get multi-omics, you get transcriptomics. You know, that's the thing about science. It sometimes
everything is connected.
Yeah, but sometimes people get stuck in their bubbles. And it is, you know, like I mentioned, I love my epigenetics, you know, and that's that bit above the genes, you know, and I love pulling that in, because it's a really interesting way to sort of try and break what the nature or nurture thing for me, which is another debate, which is I don't know if it's interesting anymore, but it used to be a very big debate, you know, what matters more? Is it how, you know, their genes, or how you raise them, you know, or how people live their lives?
Kieran, you look like you're about to say something.
Well, I mean, you know, with all the best respect to the scientific world, I think no matter what you do to try and predict things, I still think there's a huge assumption that goes on in the science world. So talking to a psychiatrist the other day, he said, "Oh no, it's quite proven that schizophrenia in a family, or, you know, major mental health problems in a family, is definitely genetic." He said, "We know that because it goes back so many generations." And it still seemed to be like, wait a minute, so does nurture, so does the whole culture of the family. It doesn't prove anything whatsoever to me. But to them, they feel it's just proven, it's absolutely definite. I mean, how else would it be explained? And I think that the same with genes. I mean, you know, there's a lot more to learn about them, I'm sure. I mean, I thought genes were meant to switch on and off accordingly. I thought there was some evidence that might happen. And if it doesn't, who knows what really happens? I mean, why do some genes kick in and why they don't? I mean, I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm talking off the top of my hat, so I do apologize, Rebecca, but I don't think we can determine the world as we think scientists can. And, you know, there was an interesting thing with algorithms interviewing people based on what the company wanted. And, you know, obviously they're programmed by people. And they found that in the end, when they actually met the people, nearly all the candidates that were chosen by the algorithm failed in these jobs. They were useless, but the algorithm said they would be the best person for the job. So when they re-interviewed, the people that failed badly were the ones that actually succeeded very well in the job, but after being employed by the person who realized that they were the right candidate. It was absolutely basically useless, even though it was, you know, pretty accurate in terms of trying to judge their ability. So I think, you know, hopefully, because I hope we don't live in a world which is determined by factual pre-knowledge.
So hang on a sec, let me just rewind a little. So what you're saying here is that there's some kind of algorithm that worked out the candidate with the best ability and it got it right, but they were not actually the best candidate for the job after all.
Well, they all got fired in the end, because they weren't the right person for the job, but they allowed it to go ahead just to see how it worked, thinking, well, this is going to be the answer. And they didn't meet them beforehand, so they didn't have any prejudice.
Right.
But it turned out to be wrong, and you know, that's the human factor in there.
Yeah.
That turned out to be the most important part.
No, but I just have to say, like, I agree that just because we think we know things, you know, even like the thing with schizophrenia, like, scientists don't know genes. Also, point out, I just have a scientist background, but I am not trained, in case I sound like I'm making sense.
All we do is we just say, just appeal to all the psychiatrists that are watching the Vimeo and say, if you want to correct anything, come on the Zoom.
Please correct me.
So off you go, Rebecca. You are definitely the expert here, because I think you're probably the only person with a science degree on this Talkaoke right now.
And also that doesn't mean doesn't really mean much either. Yeah. But yes, no, there is a lot we don't know, and there's a lot of things with scientific papers that maybe not with scientific papers, but also how they're reported, is that, you know, gene for schizophrenia found, and it's like, no, a gene that potentially can confer a relation to people being more likely to get schizophrenia has been shown. But that's harder to explain, and it's harder to convey. Mostly, that's harder to convey in a way that makes people feel happy, and also it conveys change, because these things are important. Like these discoveries are important. The fact that, especially with schizophrenia, like you said, this is the thing, is that I think schizophrenia, especially, people don't know, and people just want to know, because people don't want to have schizophrenia. They don't want to think of it as like running in their family because of something they've done, or, you know, and potentially that goes to, well, it's in the genes, so it's not me. But, you know, there is all this, you know, this very interesting thing about, you know, people go, oh, it must be, you know, how they're raised, or their family environment. But then you also have, like, you know, in the womb, you know, and what were people exposed. So there's all these different things and all these different systems that overlay and interact. And it's really important to keep that in mind, especially if you're trying to read about two patients, you know, not just having this thin slice of people's lives, but trying to, you know, gather everything you can in a way that's responsible to see how you can help someone. Yeah,
I mean, but it must be very difficult to move that frame into this kind of very positive, how do we help this person with the diagnosis? When, I mean, I don't have this experience, but if you are a parent and you do have a child that's diagnosed with schizophrenia, it must be incredibly, you know, it must be hard to sort of like shift that into positive kind of thing of like, how do I help my child, rather than, oh, did I do something wrong, or is there something wrong with me? Do you know what I mean? And that, how do we actually escape from that kind of, that feeling of responsibility, or being somehow, I don't know what the word, negligent in some way, even if it's, you know, if it's, whether it be our genes or something we did wrong in bringing them up. I don't know, I'm not a parent, so I'm gonna I'm really out of my depth here. Any parents, please do join this. So you're a parent. I mean, we started this whole thing about this diagnosis. Is there this feeling of responsibility as a parent that somehow, you know, society is making you responsible when your child gets this or that diagnosis?
Well, certainly with Pitt-Hopkins syndrome, it's de novo.
Yeah.
So say normally, and even if it wasn't,
Yeah.
it would have been something that happened when the mother or father was developing in the womb. So
Right.
it would have been gone that far. But I can remember, people in the past when we didn't know what what Christopher's diagnosis was, saying things that
Yeah. That somehow it's kind of your fault, or you've done something wrong.
and it's natural for parents to think that. I mean, I had a few miscarriages, and I was part of miscarriage support groups. All of us were always going over what had we done, had we gone for a long walk, or I helped someone carry a pushchair up the stairs, things like that. You always, it's just natural for people to blame themselves. It's funny you're talking about schizophrenia, because actually one of the genes that's been connected with schizophrenia is TCF4, but overexpression of it, whereas with our children, they don't have it's or hapless insufficiency, which I never know quite what the technical meaning of that is, but they don't have as much, they only have one gene, it's one allele that's working, and the other is affected and not doing its job, and it's only you only need with Pitt-Hopkins, that's another reason why it's not sort of inherited, as far as I understand, that Rebecca might be able to explain to me more, that it is because you only have to have one allele not working on that's affected, and the child has Pitt-Hopkins syndrome. It's not one of these things you need two and one's
so it's not a normally recessive gene. Okay, but there is this kind of, I mean, I guess it's up to you where you want to take this conversation, but there's certainly this feeling of responsibility when you've got kids, of doing it right or not doing it right, and not, I guess that society, it's not really, science wants to be neutral, but does that some of that kind of feeling kind of spill over? We've got this visualization behind me. Maybe Rick could just make me disappear so we can see the different two faces and see how are they different faces? Oh, they look pretty much the same, a bit.
Look like mirrors.
Yeah. But is there a different face? Is there a right wing face and a left wing face? Kieran says definitely there's a strange kind of face with the Trump entourage. So where do we want to go with this conversation? Do we want to talk about this in a way? I feel like what this is about is this kind of sense of judgment, which is kind of like a moral judgment or a value judgment, which can't help but find its way into science, one way or another, or into medicine, or into, is that just who we are as human beings, that we have to sort of see things like this? And talking about this cognitive bias that Rebecca was talking about, is there another side to that prejudice where we are making judgments that actually are beneficial judgments, not just discriminatory judgments with our biases? That's another way to go. Any thoughts on that as well? Maybe not. Katie, you're smiling there. Does that mean you're necessarily left wing? Where do you want to take this conversation? We've only got like 15 minutes left, so we are kind of wrapping this up now. So where do you want to take this conversation? Any thoughts?
I can share one. I'm not sure, maybe even it'll be the final thought as it's the last 15 minutes, but I think until we become more comfortable talking about not only our own personal views on the subject, but evaluating how other people, the rest of the society, would look at it. Yeah, I think that's the way to figure out the best way forward. And what I've noticed with a lot of other diseases, a lot of other medical issues, which may have had some ethical concerns or social stigma or any of those issues, usually higher public awareness helps a lot. Like even with autism and HIV and so on, like independently of how it's caused, independently what kind of the stigma was there, higher awareness helps push it forward, helps us to for everyone to understand it better. But this is the question, like with genomics, it's until we understand better the relationship between nature and nurture, we will be unable to figure out what is the right direction forward. Like it would be much easier to say, just be aware of your genetics if we could point our finger exactly where the nature ends and the nurture begins. But it's not some rigid straight line right there. It's a very fluid thing, unique, almost it seems unique to everyone. So it's a very good point. Like both with that dating, with this, it's how to, okay, if we can't decide which way ethically it's right, because we can find how all of them can go wrong, what should be the criteria for us to decide which way is right? If like ethical questions alone don't give that answer. So is it just push the awareness and tell people they have to deal with the reality, or do we pause everything, pause the awareness program and just keep it as it is now, known only for people who are affected, and figure out more before we go public? Or do we try to push it faster?
But I mean, how do you raise awareness when, as you say, it's so darn complicated and complex, and we're only just scratching really scratching the surface of this knowledge? How is it possible really to raise awareness? It's a bit like, giving somebody a book to read that's not really been finished and expecting it to be a popular.
Yeah, but then you can gauge their reaction as they read the book, and you can continue writing during that period, right?
And I think, Katie, you're completely right that even if we don't know all the answers, it is really important to get that awareness out there.
It will help us get the answers faster. It will involve more people. It will involve more views. There may be ones which we are not aware, because I mean, at the moment, it's a group of 6. So I mean, it would be great to not only to figure out what other people's opinions are on the subject, but the reasons for those opinions.
Yeah.
Because I'm pretty sure, at least in many cases, especially since it was a situation in the past, probably in many cases their view is not so much because of the subject, but because of lack of awareness on the subject, lack of understanding. So, I mean, we already have some understanding, but probably here comes the issue where everyone assumes that scientists talk only when they know the final answer, instead of realizing that it's kind of a journey. We always become more and more accurate, and we continue finding out more, and it's never the end of the journey. But the public view on that is that no, science is a very exact science thing where the answer is always either yes or a no.
I mean, this actually will probably inform our discussion later on today when we're talking about COVID. And are the public just expecting the scientists to have hard and fast answers straight away? Well, as you said, science is a journey. So yeah, I mean, what do other people think about this question of awareness? Kieran?
Just to pick up on what Katie was saying, I remember, I mean, it's going back a bit now because it's probably at least 10 years old, but when there was a kind of idea that there was a genetic cause for being a gay man, and it was specifically, I think it was because they found the speech area of the brain to be as developed as a woman's in gay men, but not in straight men when they did autopsies. And no one knew whether it was development or nurtured, but it convinced some very right-wing Republicans that they should change their views on LGBT, because if it was genetic, then it was God-given and therefore not a choice,
right?
A bad choice in their view. And you know, that it did help basically the cause of LGBT people
right.
in those extreme circumstances, and people would have had to have grown up with. They probably had children that might have been LGBT. So
yeah,
I think that it can be used in a very positive way if we start to understand that maybe our sexual nature, for instance, is predetermined a little bit by our genes. If that is part of what's revealed, I don't know what's going to be revealed, then I think it can possibly sway people that are very stuck.
Yeah.
That things have to be this way. You can't change it.
Okay, well, that's a really interesting point with so many different kind of grappling points there. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what side of that to pick up on. But as you say, yeah, go on.
Well, what I like to pick up on is that I think, like you said, that in certain cases it does help when you can point to, you know, for example, sexuality being linked to something that isn't controllable for a person. I think the problem is that you have to be really careful, because obviously it helps in that situation, but then there are other situations where that is not helpful. And it doesn't further the conversation, even if it's true. So I think that's this balance of awareness of not putting blame, but also acknowledging the truth of the matter. Like, and you know, even if it is something even if it is controllable, it doesn't mean it's controllable by you. Does that make sense? Because it might be like, oh, it's, you know, the air where you live. It's like, well, people can't choose where they live as much as we'd like to think we can sometimes. You know, there was that. So I won't go off any further on that. But yeah, raising awareness it's a really interesting thing, because then that is what we want to do to help patients, right? We want to get this awareness so people know what they're doing. Like, I can't think of a good example, but the more you talk about something, the more people go, oh, I think that affects me, or that affects someone I know, and then the more likely they are to get help.
I mean, I think we're all agreed that awareness is good, but you know, it's awareness of some sometimes very complex issues. You know, just in the point that Kieran made, there's so many different layers to that discovery of this research. You know, which might have been seen as, you know, someone's doing somewhere in a lab somewhere in the world. They're doing autopsies on the brains of people with different sexualities to try and compare them. I mean, does that mean we need to make all the scientists projects all around the world? You know, can people be aware of all this science going on? So have you got a point for this one? I feel like we're kind of winding up anyway, but there's this question of awareness, and we know awareness can help, but how do we actually improve awareness out there in the world of the non-expert?
Of the non-expert, I was thinking more of like when we look at awareness as a charity and as families in our support group. Obviously we raise awareness with amongst our friends, but otherwise the general public, there was just so many ultra rare syndromes and rare conditions that you can't possibly. So someone told me very early on, you know, target the places where it's most likely to help. So, you know, to target geneticists, and doctors who aren't, you know, because obviously not all doctors are geneticists. You know, maybe schools, you know, special schools where they're more likely to have. We've not been able to do that because we're just such a tiny charity, but we have, you know, tried with geneticists, and there's still so much more to do. But it's, you know, it's time, you know, spending your effort and time where you're most likely to meet people who, having that knowledge, would be able to help other families and other children, and, you know, get them in touch.
So in your case, the awareness
the whole
is
world, you know.
Yeah, it's very targeted. But are there certain elements of, your life and what you're trying to do with Pitt Hopkins that could be relevant to all the other genetic disorders out there, all similar disorders of people that, born with other kinds of disorder? Are there things that, that kind of commonalities or connections? Do you think like a general awareness in genomics would actually help your cause as well? I mean, not necessarily done by you and your charity, but by other larger bodies.
Yes, I mean, and lots of small charities like us belong to other bodies like yours, or Genetic Alliance UK. And a lot of us get together, and then we do learn. And again, we're more likely to come into contact maybe with someone else who we've heard about through another charity, because of the circles we're in, and therefore might be able to connect people. So, but yeah, I mean, obviously, the more that everybody can know and understand, as particularly with all that's going on now with COVID, I mean, it's just some of the ignorance that's going on is just terrible.
Yeah. Well, that's a whole talk. Yeah.
But I say this morning with Genetic Alliance UK, we were having a talk about. I think there's somebody at the door. Sorry, our Alexa tells us. To raise awareness, for instance, of the truth about vaccines, so that all this, aren't the people that don't know the information can have the correct information and not be worried about it. And that say something today. A lot of groups were getting together to learn about, so that we can put, families, minds at risk, who are at risk, who are worried, not to be worried.
At rest.
Yeah, yes. That's the word.
Yeah.
So yeah, all the times that we can all connect in our kind of rare disease world. I hate that word, disease, but
Neka mentioned that as well. She said that they were all calling Down syndrome a disease, and then some Down syndrome people came and said, no, it's not a disease, and it was that exposure that actually helped, change the language.
And another country use other language. So I'm really quite one of the people that would push for it not to be called Rare Disease Day, for instance. I mean, do you all know about Rare Disease Day?
No.
Okay.
I've heard of it, yeah.
28th of February, but originally it was the 29th, obviously the rarest day in the calendar being the 29th. But often the 28th of, normally 28th of February. And that's to raise awareness of all the different rare syndromes, rare disorders, rare cancers and everything. So look out for it then. Look out for Rare Disease Day and you'll find out more. I hope one day it might be called maybe Rare Disorder Day. Maybe that would be an easier one.
Yeah.
Or some other word in the English speaking world. In other countries it isn't not necessarily known as rare disease, so it doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
But that's that's just something I feel quite strongly about.
Okay, so we'll look out for Rare Disorder Day on the 28th of January, formerly Rare Disease Day.
February,
28th of February, so of February, I should say.
It's called now. So.
Yeah. Okay, so otherwise it would be in 2 days' time. But it's in 2 days and a month's time. Yeah. Okay, so it's time to get those final thoughts. Anyone got a final thought on this? I mean, you've dropped a big one there in Sue about vaccines, and maybe we'll find out a little bit about that this afternoon. Any final thoughts from our audience? Of if you've got some final thoughts watching on Vimeo, please do write it in.
No, I think Sue ended it perfectly.
Yeah.
Not disease, go for disorders. I don't know why I dislike it being that it used to be on the 29th of February though. I'm like, no, 28th. If you want to raise awareness, do it properly.
Yeah. Although, I mean, there is something special about that special rare day of the 29th. And, it is a kind of, whenever it happens, I think it was last year it happened, didn't it? It's something to kind of shout about. But it's a bit like those people that are born on the 29th. They only get one birthday every 4 years. Okay, anyone else got any final thoughts? Kieran, Katie, any final thoughts? Margot, if you're still listening.
I'm listening. In the meantime, I allowed myself to make a very delicious salad, so I can share a recipe, but it's got nothing to do with genomics.
Okay, we can throw that into the chat, but you've got 1 minute to do it. Final thoughts, Katie? Your final thought?
Well, I guess awareness will raise anyway with all the connectivity of internet and so on. So my only hope is that more people will be open-minded when they find out about it and when they look at it, and hopefully we will figure out the better distinction between nature versus nurture, and how to, if we can't help the first one, what can we do with the second one?
I mean, can we find out a way to open people's
Yeah, like
minds?
if we have like certain genes, you know, they may be present but they may be inactive, so how do we make them inactive? How do we can we impact that somehow, or make it higher probability that it stays inactive?
How do we activate the open-mindedness gene?
Oh, that would be interesting.
Yeah. Okay, Kieran, have you got a final thought?
You put it really well there, actually. What impacts that? Keep the debate open about nurture and nature, because I find that the scientific community loves to say, no, see, it's not nurture after all. And hopefully we can celebrate the diversity that these genes give us, rather than trying to all be the same. Obviously, diseases are different, but otherwise.
Yeah. So genetic diversity is a form of diversity we should be celebrating, and yeah, that's a good. I think that's a good way to end this. So I think we're gonna end it there. And we're probably ready, because we've automatically been logged off of our stream now. So I think. So thanks.
Still live on Vimeo. It'll be there. Don't worry.
Thank you everyone for taking part. Thanks for joining in. We're going to say goodbye at this point, and it's lovely to meet some of those new faces and see some old faces returning. And join us for the next one at 3 o'clock, where we're going to be talking about genomics and COVID, I believe, if I've got that right. And that's going to be a really interesting question, whether we're going to come on to the whole vaccine debate, or this kind of, in a way, this kind of tide of lack of knowledge or superstition that kind of, seems to be sort of like flowing back and forth. I don't know. We'll find out from 3 o'clock onwards, but thanks everyone for joining this session. It's been great. We'll say goodbye.